Chief, over to you.
Okay, hey, thanks, Jit. All right, so we're going to go through this Road to Mast, role of a CPO. That title has a specific meaning, obviously tied into what we talked about yesterday, making sure you're communicating clearly. That means something because we're talking about the Road to Mast, and we're also talking about what your specific role is going to be. It's very important that you guys have an understanding of not only the instructions and the kind of black and white that we have on paper that we have to abide by, that goes all the way from Navy regs to the SORM to the UCMJ to various instructions. And that's good. You need to know that, but you also need to know where you need to position yourself and what you need to do as a chief going through various situations. And that's what we're going to talk about here. So here's how we're going to do this. Yesterday, you listened to me. Today, I want to listen to you. Okay, so if you are unprepared for this training, it's really going to be brutal, and we're going to have to slog through it. Okay, so I hope you guys all prepared and did some research and came to the table with something ready to go. And I'm going to listen to your voices, and we're going to provide you with some perspective and some additional knowledge that I hope you can take out of this. Okay, so. First up, Tim, if we can get the scenario pushed up to the slide here. Okay, so this is the scenario we're all operating off of. Just a quick up check from both team leads, selectee leads. Has everyone reviewed this? Are you all tracking the same information? And do me a favor, selectees, come off mute, because like I said, I really want to have this to be a dialogue. I don't want to have to wait for people to hit their mute button, so please come off mute and be ready to chat here.
I think it would be good if Genuine turned off their cameras just temporarily, unless they want to chime in, and then they can turn them back on to chime in. Thanks.
All right, selectees, open question to you. Roger somebody up from each boat team. Are we all looking at the same information? Have you done some research? Are you ready for this training?
Yes.
Yes, Senior.
Yes, Senior.
Okay. All right, cool. I think that was 5. Hope that was 5. All right. So this is a common scenario, right? It's not the most serious thing that could ever happen in the Navy. But it's also not something that you want to let fester and just ignore. It's obviously something that you as a chief are going to have to get into, find out what's going on, and take some action. So let's go to the next slide so we can go through the taskers. All right, boat team 1, you're up. What do you got for Navy regs? What are we talking about here?
Yes, sir. This is Chief Selectees Spencer. I'll go over the United States Navy general regulations that apply to this scenario. So we're looking at Chapter 11 of the general regulations, specifically starting with Section 2, which would be standards of conduct. So standards of conduct 1110 states that all Department of Navy personnel are expected to conduct themselves in accordance with the highest standards of personal and professional integrity and ethics, and at a minimum comply with directives issued by Secretary of Defense and Secretary of the Navy regarding standards of conduct and government ethics. Section 4 covers duties of individuals. So other general regulations that would apply to the situation would be the requirement of exemplary conduct, which is 1131, 1132, compliance with lawful orders, and then 1133, language reflecting on a superior. I'll turn it over to my fellow boat team member to continue.
Okay, all right. This is Chief Select LaBreche, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the SORM that applies here. So Chapter 1 of the SORM discusses command and control, specifically the nature of authority, responsibility, accountability, motivation, and punishment. We are referring to authority because leadership has been assigned positions of command and authority over the crew, and the crew accepts that leadership through their assignment to the unit or the boat or wherever, and they've agreed to follow lawful direction of those appointed over them. This expands to cover not only a chief's authority as appointed over the sailor in question, but also the positional authority afforded the LPO in this situation who was disrespected by the sailor. We're also looking at responsibility, which applies to leadership in that it's leadership's responsibility to work to promote an environment that motivates their crew and also keeps them free from harassment. They also have to motivate the crew through incentives, which could be positive and negative. We also have control and accountability. Those apply because those in positions of leadership have to, well, I'm sorry, let me start over. So control and accountability are important. Accountability, number one, falls on both individual sailors and supervisors in terms of self-regulation on the part of the individual or guidance and regulation of junior sailors on the part of the supervisor. Motivation applies here because it can come either through reward when someone does a good job or punishment when there are deficiencies. Other chapters of the SORM that we thought might apply here include Chapter 3, which discusses duties and responsibilities of the staff JAG. Because
okay, hey, Chief Select, I'm gonna pause you right there. You're
Okay.
doing an excellent job. The only reason I'm pausing you is because we are on a time.
Got it.
We have limited time, but that was excellent. So let me just pause right there and throw some things your way. So first of all, boat team 1, you guys are my favorite boat team already because those were excellent answers. Okay, so that portion of the SORM is incredibly powerful, and it really is a guide that you all should be familiar with. And those concepts are very key to the things that you're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis as a chief. That accountability section has a couple sub-bullets. And what I found interesting when I really dove into that was that there are 4 bullets to that, sub-bullets to accountability. The first one is something that the sailor does. Each sailor, regardless of rank or position, is fully accountable for their actions, right? The next 3 are tasks due to leadership. So 3 out of the 4 are addressed to leaders, not sailors. The sailor is accountable for their actions, and everything else with accountability is addressed to leaders, right? So that's a point that I thought was worth making. You did a great job with Navy regs. 1131 and 1132 are absolutely applicable, and they form the basis of where a lot of the stuff from the UCMJ comes from. However, there's one thing that you didn't hit that I want to cover. So I'll ask a quick question. Where does your authority as a petty officer or as a chief petty officer come from? And that's for any boat team. If any select on the line, if you know the answer, please chime in.
So your authority comes through your commanding officer. You're appointed to chief petty officer through the Navy, but anything that it comes with, like the authority of punishment or reward here, is through your commanding officer.
Well, no, not as a petty officer. That there's a deeper level piece of authority that we have, and I'll tell you what it is. It is Section 1037. Chapter 10 is another very important chapter of the U.S. Navy regs. 1037 is the authority of warrant officers, non-commissioned officers, and petty officers. And I'll read it to you. Chief warrant officers, non-commissioned officers, and petty officers shall have, under their superiors, all necessary authority for the proper performance of their duties, and they shall be obeyed accordingly. So when you are issuing an order to a subordinate petty officer, that's where that comes from, 1037. And when they violate that, they are then required to comply with those lawful orders due to 1132, which we covered. And then if they don't comply, then it moves into UCMJ territory. So those are great answers. Boat team 1, you guys set the standard. So let's move on to boat team 2 and see what you got.
Hey, good afternoon. So for boat team 2, what UCMJ articles were violated? UCMJ Article 86, unauthorized absence. Any service member, any armed forces service member to appear before his unit, organization, or the prescribed time and or place without authority is subject to Article 86. Article 92, failure to obey a lawful order or regulation, and possibly Article 112, drunkenness while on duty. What is the primary remediation for the UCMJ articles? For UCMJ Article 86 will be report shit, and I say report shit instead of counsel shit because a report shit is where you document the actual article that has been violated. Also, Article 92 and the supporting documents for Article 92, failure to obey a lawful order or regulation will be the plan of the day, which is a signed directive. And I would not write a member up for possibly drunkenness on duty, because there was nothing to substantiate the drunkenness on duty due to the scenario or what the scenario provided.
Okay, good.
And so Article 91 that we also talked about, the insubordinate conduct toward warrant officer, non-commissioned officer, or petty officer.
Thanks.
Yeah, those all apply. So great job on that. I will, and you're right. I didn't catch the name who said that, but you don't want to take action based on rumor, right? You unfortunately,
Correct.
as your chief scenario, were not there and they were not tested. So can you reliably take that charge and prove that charge even in an NJP scenario where the kind of standards of evidence are lower than court-martial? Probably not.
No.
And your CO is probably going to be wary about setting that precedent, because that gets people, it's a morale killer, right? You know, if you turn out to be wrong, that really affects your morale. You want to make sure that you have the facts and that you are prosecuting your duties as the chief accordingly. Now, one key point with this: the primary remediation for all UCMJ violations is court-martial. All right, you have to remember that. We forget that because we obviously don't use court-martial for every single UCMJ violations. UCMJ violations happen every day in the Navy, but we don't take everybody to Mast. We don't take everybody to court-martial. And the reason, obviously, is that that's a big deal. We would like to handle that at a lower level. We'd like to remediate, and we don't want to spend the time, money, and energy prosecuting minor offenses. And JAGs will tell you that if you ask them. There's a lot of things that they just are not, it just doesn't get them going. And they'd rather the command handle that informally. But per the UCMJ, if a UCMJ violation occurs, it's court-martial. That's what you can do. We just have all these other tools. And the reason I say that is because it affects discipline. It erodes discipline. Sailors will think, oh, I'll just be late. I'll just get a counseling chit, whatever. Well, no, you actually can be court-martialed for that. All right, you're UA. All right, you're not at your place of duty. Next, let's go to boat team 3.
Okay, so QMC Select Kirkpatrick here, and so our section of this is what are the procedures for preliminary investigation that guides the conduct of the preliminary investigation. And I'm not sure. I hope you can see this. Oh, it's disappearing. Well, it's the JAGMAN Investigations Handbook. I just wanted everyone to see what it looked like there. But it looks like it's not going to let me do that. So basically what's going to happen is the convening authority, in most cases probably the XO is going to, or the CO is going to appoint someone. It could be, it's going to be a PIO, which is a preliminary investigations officer. This person is usually going to be a senior chief or higher, or it could be a junior officer. It could be an officer that investigates enlisted. So you can either have a senior chief or above, or an officer that investigates enlisted, but you'll never have an enlisted PIO investigate a situation with an officer. So in this case, it could be a senior chief or an officer. And it's typically going to be a disinterested third party. So, and what they're going to do is they're going to go, and it's going to be a very informal, just sort of like fact finding. We're going to go around and talk to everyone involved, talk to the petty officer that was in charge that this sailor spoke harshly to, and talk to the witnesses that heard the altercation and saw the altercation, things of that nature. And then it's going to compile this information, and it's going to report this back up to the convening authority. And it doesn't have to be a written report, anything like that. It's pretty informal. And then the command's going to have, well, in any and all cases, there's 4 options. Not all these options are applicable here, right? So what's applicable here could potentially be take no further action, or conduct a command investigation, or convene a court or board of inquiry, which would just be straight up Mast or court martial. So that would be up to then XO and CO to decide whether they wanted to kick it. They could kick it back down to the chief's mast to do a DRB. If they wanted to, they can bring them straight to mast. And so that's sort of how that goes. And it's again, it's informal, and it's going to be a third party that doesn't have, not in the direct chain of command of that sailor, or the other, the senior person, that the first class, the LPO.
Okay, so let's pause there. So a lot of good stuff, a lot of stuff that you covered. One thing that I will say is, you mentioned that a report doesn't have to be issued, a written report, or isn't issued, something to that effect. I will tell you that it usually is. Even in a preliminary investigating scenario, the CO usually wants to see something in writing, and that's partly a function of time. You know, they're busy, they're doing stuff. Their triad is bouncing around doing triad stuff. They just want to see the product, right? Because there is going to be interviews that should be documented. I was involved in several last year. We have 3 going on right now at one of the commands here in Spain. So they happen fairly frequently. And CEOs typically like to see something on paper. I see a hand up. Let's go to John.
So you mentioned, you said it was a senior chief or above that would be doing the investigation on a junior sailor. That's not always true based on what your command has. I've done at least 2 of them, one at that Echelon 2 command, and also at a NOSC. So when the senior officer comes to you and says, you're going to be an investigating officer, that's where your authority came from too.
Roger, Chief.
Yeah, exactly. So this is something that you could get called to do. Now, the last question I want to and point I want to highlight is, this is, something that you could get called to do, but it's obviously not something that you have a lot of expertise in, and been doing a lot or regularly. So, what is your reference? Who do you go to when you have questions about how to process this and go through a PI?
Your legal officer.
Legal, JAG, right? Find some help. Use your network. Use the people around you. If you have an LNC, that'd be a great resource. Say, hey, I've got a PI. I've been appointed as PIO. I need some help. And they'll be able to guide you. All right, go Team 4. Vote Team 4.
All right, so for our question, we have, what are the procedures for conducting a disciplinary review board, and what reference guides its conduct? All right, so first, I'll just mention that the DRB is going to be a fact-finding evolution. It's going to be to interview the individuals involved, review all the relevant comments, and to get some input from the immediate chain of command. It's going to be the LPO, LCPO, possibly a DIVO, any information that might be beneficial to help get to the actual root cause of the problem. So like in the scenario that we had, we might need to find out what's going on with this sailor to figure out why he's possibly having a problem with drinking or resorting to alcohol as maybe a coping mechanism to deal with whatever the particular issue is. A DRB is when you go in front of the mess and figure out exactly what's going on with this sailor and what might be causing them to, like in this instance, we know he'd act out because he was probably intoxicated, but what's actually pushing him to actually resort to alcohol to cope. All right, so the DRB will review the actual facts and make recommendations for disposition. And this is kind of the step that we'll go to before they go into something such as XOI or Mast. All right, and the actual references are going to be the JAG instruction 5800.7 Foxtrot, Change 3, Chapter 1, and also the Manual for Courts Martial.
Do those references have specific guides for the conduct of DRBs?
For that one, you'll use the JAG instruction, gives you the actual the instructions on how to actually avoid the steps for avoiding going directly to Mast. And for Manual for Courts Martial, gives you the actual facts that you have to actually move it up to the XO if you want to dismiss the actual DRB or the charges that are brought forth to that sailor.
But the question is, does it guide the specific conduct of DRB? Does it tell you how to do it?
Yeah.
No? Is that our answer?
No.
Yeah.
Okay. So DRB is a command level event, right? There is not a formal process established. Now there are scripts that kind of guide it, and we've kind of settled into a normal DRB routine, but you can do it any way you want, really. And some DRBs tend to lean on the investigation side, some lean on the counseling side. Sometimes the situation is very, very clear, and there doesn't need to be a whole extensive investigative fact-finding mission. You know, it's clear to the chain of command what happened, and the perspective of the chain is to really use the chief's mess to really chew on that sailor, counsel them, you know, get a sense of whether that sailor understands what they did is wrong, and whether they have, you know, contrition, whether they're willing to make a change and turn into a more positive attitude or positive disposition. That's kind of the goal in some of the cases. Sometimes you do need to get more facts. Sometimes it's not clear, and the command doesn't know whether this needs to be an NJP situation or not. And they really do need to get that information. So you need to be prepared for both of those scenarios, and you definitely need to be understanding what kind of situation you're in and taking guidance from your chain, your CMC, who's ever leading this effort, and moving forward accordingly. But you're not going to find a specific, you know, this is, you know, A to B to C for DRBs, right? It's just it's a command level tool. It's an informal tool to get some answers and to perform counseling. All right, let's get to boat team 5.
Hey, good evening, ITC Select Gibbs, Nos Bessemer. So what are the proceedings for conducting a non-judicial punishment or captain's mast in JP? So the processes for this is going to start out with the service member's right to refuse awarding the NJP, but just refusing the right to get it does not actually stop the process and power of the CO to pass down punishment from that. And even if during the proceedings, the service member can halt the proceedings or stop the proceedings, but that still does not stop the administrative power of the CO from putting down the punishment. Also, there's the right to counsel. You can have this. It's not a right to actually have counsel during the NJP proceedings, but a right to have counsel if you were to refuse the proceedings. Also, your rights. Also, your rights at the NJP hearing. You have the right to be present unless the service member has waived that right to have a personal appearance. You also have the right to remain silent. You know, to not self-incriminate. It's coming up next. You also have the have a personal representative assistant, but that is not the right to counsel. To examine all the evidence used against him or her in it. Examine does not mean you actually get a copy of any of the evidence. It just means you're allowed to examine it. You also have a call to a reasonably available witness, to have a witness to be there for your person, and request a public hearing. The member may request this choosing a hearing, but there's not actually a right to one. So that could be denied by the CO. Your military rules of evidence is except for your privilege and a right against self-incrimination, your right to remain silent. During the proceedings, there's also the standard of proof.
Okay, we're kind of going down into like a JAG, you know, just a recitation of stuff that's in the JAG-man, and that's kind of not where I want to go, because again, this is the role of the chief, right? You know, at this point in time, you know, everything that we covered up until now is definitely like command level issues. Once we're here, now we're starting to get into JAG level issues, and they're going to know the ins and outs, your LNs, your JAGs. They're going to know all of these military rules of evidence things. You need to keep a framework of the bigger picture. Okay, and there's one thing. Speaking of that, there's one thing that you missed that I was hoping to hear, because in the beginning, you started talking about, the right to refuse Mast and stuff, but imagine we've gotten to that point and they haven't been read their rights, and they've been given statements and, giving all kinds of information. However, then they refuse Mast, and now it has to potentially go to court martial, and you haven't read them their rights, and now all that information that you've received is potentially null and void because you didn't read that service member their rights. All right. So these are bigger picture concepts that, rather than getting into the tiny, I don't want to say tiny, but the various minutia of the JAG manual, because there's a lot. I mean, it's a big manual. There's a lot of stuff, and you're not an LN, you're not a JAG, right? So understand where you need to position yourself. You need to protect the sailor from, this is a stressful event for that sailor. Sailors get very, very stressed out at Mast. Some sailors could become suicidal. You need to monitor the welfare of that sailor and make sure that they're actually doing what they need to do and they have the strength to get through this. You're gonna enforce discipline as a chief, but you also need to ensure welfare. Those are two things that you can never separate as a chief. You're gonna maintain the standard, but you're also gonna mentor and guide and teach and really lead and help protect the sailors' welfare there. You're also going to protect the command. And going back to that, reading their rights, that is protecting the CO, because if they muck up the processes prior to captain's Mast, then the JAG's going to turn to the CO and say, hey, I can't prosecute this. You guys messed up all your procedures. And that's a pretty basic one, is making sure that when you're taking statements, if it is a serious situation, you need to recognize that, hey, we're going to need to read the accused service member their rights and go from there. And if they want to go NJP, then great. We can handle it that way. If it's something that the commander feels needs to go to court martial, well, then he or she retains that option. But don't stay in the big picture, okay? And that's why we wanted to talk about this and where the chief is supposed to be positioned, because you're going to have a role throughout this whole process. And part of that was at DRB, part of that's advising the commander, part of that is supporting the CMC or whoever's leading the disciplinary proceedings on the enlisted side, and then you can get to the right answer, okay? And the ultimate goal was to maintain discipline and support our sailors and support our COs, right? And that's what your role is going to be. Questions? Comments? All right, I will turn it back over to the leads, and that concludes our training. Thanks so much.
Selectee LaBreche, did you have a question?
I did. Sorry, I couldn't work the little hand. I was just wondering, Senior Chief, you said if you don't read the service member their rights, then the evidence could be thrown out. At what point in all these proceedings is it like a cop show, right, where once you start the investigation, you read them their rights, or is it at the beginning of the Mast? When does this happen?
Well, definitely prior to Mast, 100%. But COs can do it differently. Some will say, all right, anytime you are starting to investigate something, read their rights. And JAGs will probably advise that as well. Because sometimes you might be thinking that, oh, this is just a little sailor was late, and then you start talking to a sailor and you find out there's something really crazy going on. At that point, you need to just stop right then and there. There's not a hard and fast answer. Definitely before Mast, but other than that, you definitely want to understand the situation and make a good decision.
Yeah, so the way this often happens is you'll have a sailor shoplifting at the exchange, maybe, or something going on in the barracks. You don't know what's real or not yet, right? And you start talking to them. It starts going down that path where it seems like they're starting to tell you that they were doing some wrong things. You need to keep their Miranda. Otherwise, take them after that and use that against them. They can get out of it because they told you and you did not read them the Miranda. Okay, so it's that clear. Like, I mean, it was when I went to the legal course, it was surprising to me. Senior enlisted legal course, SLLC, something you can all try to attend while you're senior enlisted at some point. And they say that gotta have those Miranda rights read. As soon as it starts to look like it's nefarious, the officer will still tell you what's going on. You should carry a little card that has the Miranda rights on it, kind of like police do. Say, hey, want to make sure you read your rights, you understand them, so that anything they say at that point doesn't mean you have to take them to mass because you read them the rights. You still work things out with your skipper and your man, but it does mean that now if they say something really serious, that it can be used on all those things later on. So that it's key. It's very important.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, great question.
And one of the things I wanted to mention real quick was the fitness for duty exam. That can be a great way to obtain evidence for a sailor that's drunk on duty without having to Mirandize them. And then that evidence can be used against them once they've been Mirandized, because if they're not fit for duty, you can get that blood draw through your fitness for duty exam without Mirandizing.
All right, great stuff. Really appreciate your work on this. You guys came prepared, and that was most appreciated. So great job. Pending any other questions or comments, that's all I have.
So I have one question, Senior. So when it comes, I know that like in the civilian sector, when it comes to like the Fifth Amendment, which is similar to these rights that are, to not have to speak to incriminate yourself, right? I know that also, as I've been told, that applies to like witnesses as well. They don't have to speak to incriminate someone else under the Fifth Amendment. That is there something similar to that within the Navy?
No, it's exactly opposite. It's exactly opposite. Navy regulations and the UCMJ require you to speak if you witness a UCMJ violation. Now, if you are married to the service member, or if it's you yourself, the right to not self-incriminate, yes, same, that applies. The right to not have to incriminate your spouse, that applies. And there may be one other scenario in the JAG manual, but by and large, you are required. It is totally different than being a civilian. That is not a perfect corollary. You definitely are required to report those violations.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? I thank you, Chuck, for the great training. Selects at this time, we will break out into the Teams channel for both team breakouts, but there's been a slight change to the schedule. Please note that we will be coming back to the fantail for some quick guidance from the charge book committee at 1900. Okay, so go to your team rooms now and then come back here at 1900 for some quick guidance.